The rain came down in harsh sheets that morning as Isabel Carter, 25, hurried through the gleaming glass doors of Halson Tower. Her light brown hair clung to her cheeks. Her clothes were damp from the storm, and the borrowed umbrella had snapped inside out blocks ago. Her shoes squished with every step, and she kept her head down, avoiding the stares of the polished professionals who passed her. She wasn't even supposed to be there. Isabel was covering a last-minute cleaning shift for her friend Laura, who had come down with the flu. New floor, new map, first day, no introductions. Just a screenshot of directions and a text that read, "Please, Belle, just this once." After changing into her plain blue uniform in a side restroom, Isabel quickly tied her hair back, grabbed her mop and caddy, and checked the map on her phone. Floor 14, East Wing, Office 1401. The hallway was quiet, carpeted, intimidating. She found the door slightly ajar, no nameplate, no lights on, only the sound of her own wet footsteps echoing down the corridor. With the elevator already closing behind her, she stepped inside. Water puddled beneath her from the rain. She whispered to herself, "Better clean this before someone slips." She didn't know that this wasn't just another office. She had unknowingly walked into the private executive suite of Nicholas "Nick" Wycliffe, the CEO of Wycliffe & Co. As she began mopping, a gust of wind from the slightly cracked window knocked over a stack of folders, papers scattered everywhere. Some fluttered across the desk, others to the floor. Isabel gasped and dropped to her knees, frantically trying to collect the mess, her damp palms smearing the ink as she worked. She was so focused on gathering the papers that she didn't hear the heavy footsteps behind her. "What the hell are you doing in my office?" The voice cut through the silence like a knife. She froze. Looking up, she saw a tall man standing in the doorway. His wet coat still clung to his frame, and his charcoal gray suit looked like it had just come from the rain. His jaw was tight, his pale blue eyes sharp as glass. Isabel's voice trembled. "I didn't know this was yours. The door was open. I thought it was empty. I was just cleaning, I swear." Nick's gaze fell from her face to the scattered files. "Really? Because it looks more like you were digging through confidential material." "No. The wind. The papers." She reached for her bag in a panic. It tipped over. A water bottle rolled out, followed by a charger and a crumpled drawing that slowly unfurled across the tile. It was a child's sketch in crayon, a small figure holding an umbrella, wrapping their arms around a woman's waist. The two were smiling. Blue rain streaked down above them. Nick's expression changed. He stared at the drawing. UNMOVING. The child's posture, the crooked umbrella, the woman's gentle embrace. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a memory. A memory he thought no one else could have possibly known. He hovered his thumb over the phone in his pocket, about to call security. "Please," Isabel said quietly, noticing the tension. "Don't call anyone. I didn't even know whose office this was. I wasn't stealing anything. I promise." Nick didn't say a word at first. His eyes were still fixed on the drawing. Something had softened in them, barely, a flicker. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice lower now. Isabel hesitated. "I drew it last night. It was just a dream, I think, or a memory. I'm not sure." Nick looked at her face for the first time, really looked, her freckles, her flushed cheeks. And then he saw it, a small birthmark just near her ear. His mother had the exact same mark. The room fell silent. Only the distant hum of the building and the faint tap of rain against the glass remained. Isabel quietly gathered the rest of the papers and stood. "I'll go. I didn't mean to cause trouble." Nick gave a slow nod, still unreadable. "Wait." She stopped and turned. "You forgot this." He held out the drawing. It was slightly wrinkled, but intact. She stepped forward to take it. Their fingers brushed. Just a second of contact, but something electric passed between them. "Thank you," she whispered. Nick didn't respond, but as she turned and left the office, his eyes lingered. Not with suspicion, but curiosity. And something else. Recognition. The rest of the day, Isabel kept her head low. She scrubbed floors, wiped desks, emptied bins. No one spoke to her. No one ever really did. Usually, she liked it that way. Being invisible gave her peace. But today, that silence felt like it was pressing down on her chest. She kept replaying the moment in the office, the man's sharp voice, the way he stared at her drawing, the chill in his gaze when he said nothing at all. She tried to shake it off. It was just a mistake, a misunderstanding. By nightfall, The building was quiet again. The elevators dinged less frequently, and most lights had dimmed. Isabel pushed her cleaning cart from one hallway to another, lost in the rhythm of work. She didn't see him again, or so she thought. From a distance, Nick stood at the end of the corridor, out of sight, watching. Isabel was wiping down a window, humming softly to herself. Her uniform hung loosely on her petite frame. Her ponytail bounced with each motion. She looked so completely out of place in a building like this, and yet, for some strange reason, she also looked like she belonged more than anyone. Later that night, she unknowingly left her sketchbook behind. It had been tucked into the bottom of her cart, wedged between cloths and spare gloves. She hadn't even noticed it missing when she left. Nick found it. He meant to return it, unopened, immediately, but he didn't. Instead, he stood at his desk and flipped it open, his breath caught. Page after page, he found images that didn't look like imagination. They looked like memory, his memory, a boy with lonely eyes, a mother with soft features, a woman holding a child, her face full of both love and sorrow. And then, the image that hit him hardest, a mother holding a small boy against her chest, her expression warm and tired, a tiny birthmark drawn above her cheekbone. It was in the exact same spot as the one on his mother's face, the same face shape, something no stranger could ever guess. Nick stared at the pencil lines, feeling his control waver. Nothing in the boardroom had ever shaken him like this. The next evening, Isabel found her sketchbook returned to her cart, tucked gently beneath a clean towel, untouched, except for one thing. A single yellow sticky note on the first page. In neat handwriting. It read, "Why do your dreams look like my memories?" She stared at it for a long time. Her heart thudded in her chest. He had seen it all, but he hadn't been angry. He had asked a question, a deeply personal one that said, "I felt it too." She clutched the book to her chest, unsure of what it all meant. But for the first time since she started this job, she didn't feel invisible. And somewhere else in that towering building, Nick Wycliffe stared at the framed drawing on his desk. The child in the rain. The woman with the birthmark. The moment he thought had died with his mother, and the girl who brought it all back by accident. The next evening, when Isabel pushed her cart through the 12th floor corridor, she didn't expect anything unusual. But as she approached the end of the hallway, she found the office door already open. Inside, Nick stood near the window, arms crossed, the city lights flickering behind him. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "I asked you to come back," he said quietly, not because the floor needed cleaning. She stopped just inside the room, uncertain, her gloved hand still gripping the cart handle. Her gaze dropped to the floor. "I can leave if you want." Nick shook his head and gestured toward a chair by the window, said, "Please." Isabel hesitated, then stepped forward and sat on the edge of the leather chair, posture stiff, unsure if she was about to be scolded or something else. Nick walked slowly to his desk and leaned against it. "The drawing you dropped, the child holding his mother in the rain." She looked up sharply, cheeks flushed. "I didn't mean to leave it. I sketch sometimes from dreams. They don't always make sense. It just comes." Nick's eyes searched hers, the woman's face, the birthmark on her cheek. "You remember that?" Isabel frowned, trying to recall. "I don't know." She was tired looking, but warm, kind, and yeah, the mark. "I didn't think much of it." He opened his desk drawer and carefully pulled out an old photograph. Its corners were worn. The colors had faded. He placed it on the desk in front of her. Isabel's breath caught. The woman in the picture. She looked exactly like the one in her drawing. The same eyes, same gentle sadness, and the birthmark, identical. "This is your mother?" she asked, her voice trembling. Nick gave a slight nod. "She died when I was 8. This is the only photo I have left of her. I haven't shown it to anyone." "I didn't know," Isabel whispered. "I swear I didn't." "I believe you," Nick said quietly. They sat in silence, not awkward, but waited, like the people standing at the edge of something they didn't know how to name. Isabel finally spoke. "I don't know why I see things. It just happens. Sometimes after long days, when I feel too much, I draw them so they won't fade." Nick leaned back slightly, his voice softer than before. "Maybe you're not just clearing your head. Maybe you're remembering something that doesn't belong to just you." She looked down at her gloves, fidgeting. "That sounds impossible. Or maybe," he said, "it's the most human thing we do. Carry echoes of one another." He walked across the room to the wall safe, tapped in a code, and returned with another photograph wrapped in linen. He placed it in front of her without a word. The picture was older, more faded. His mother again, standing in the garden with a young boy beside her. Nick's voice cracked just slightly. This was taken 2 months before she died. No one else has ever seen this. Isabel stared at the image, her fingers trembling. Why me? She whispered. Nick didn't look away. I don't know. But when I saw your drawing, it was like someone reached inside and pulled a thread I didn't know was still attached. She opened her sketchbook and turned to the rain scene again, slowly. She slid it toward him. Maybe it was a message, she said, barely audible. From her, from something. Nick reached out and gently traced the crayon outline of the woman's face with his fingertip. It was a perfect match. He looked up at her. You're not just someone who walked into the wrong office. Isabel blinked, overwhelmed. Then, who am I? Nick gave her the faintest smile. Maybe the only person who's ever seen what mattered most to me without being told. She didn't speak. Her breath hitched quietly, as if the weight of that truth had been sitting on her chest for years without her knowing. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but inside that room, something new had started to pour, not with water, but with memory and the strange, impossible connection between the people who had never meant to find each other. The next night, Isabel was reorganizing supplies by the service elevator. She crouched beside a cart, stacking brushes and folding cloths in silence. Her hair had fallen slightly loose, framing her face in soft, unintentional waves. The corridor was dim, lit by flickering overhead bulbs, wrapped in an atmosphere of hushed stillness. She didn't notice Nick until he stepped close. His voice was low, almost gentle. Do you have a minute? Startled, she looked up, blinking, her hands still mid-movement. Yes, of course, she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. Nick didn't speak again. He simply turned and nodded toward the stairwell. Isabel stood, wiped her palms on her uniform, and followed him. They climbed in silence. The rooftop garden was quiet. The sky above them was streaked with remnants of lavender and deep blue. The city below glowed, distant and small, like stars scattered across earth. Cool air brushed against Isabel's damp cheeks. She wrapped her sweater around herself, and Nick stood by the railing, his coat shifting in the breeze. My mother's name was Eleanor, he said, eyes still fixed on the horizon. She died from heart failure. 1 minute she was here, the next gone. Isabel folded her arms, her voice soft but sincere. I'm so sorry. He nodded once, slowly. I was supposed to visit her that day, but I was angry over something. Small, childish. I stayed with a friend instead. His jaw clenched. I never got to say goodbye. Isabel didn't reply right away. Her eyes studied the rooftop tiles, their repeating patterns suddenly heavy with emotion. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I didn't mean to bring it all back. You didn't bring it back, he said, turning to her. You reminded me that I never let it go. They stood quietly for a while, neither rushing to speak, as if the silence itself had become something sacred. I don't know how it works, Isabel finally said. Sometimes I wake up with these images in my mind, colors, people, places I've never seen. I grab a pencil before they disappear. It feels like I'm carrying someone else's memory. Nick's gaze didn't waver. You didn't know she existed, but you drew her as if you did. She shook her head, a small, helpless smile tugging at her lips. It must sound crazy. No, he said calmly. It sounds like you're rare, like you're a thread in something bigger, maybe even a miracle. Isabel's breath caught in her chest. Her throat tightened. She looked down at her hands, her fingers lightly smudged with pencil lead. I don't want to carry this much, she whispered, but I can't not draw. Nick stepped closer, his voice even softer now. Maybe that's what empathy really is, carrying pieces of other people, even when you don't have to. She blinked back tears. Why didn't you report me? I walked into your office. I could have been fired. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. His palm was warm, grounding, because you gave me something I didn't realize I needed. A memory I'd buried, and a reason to look at it differently. Her eyes glistened, not from shame, not from fear, but from something deeper, something that felt like understanding. She motioned toward his hand. You don't have to explain. He smiled, faint but sincere. Just don't stop. Not for me, not for anyone. She lifted her chin. looking at him through soft eyes. Behind them, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky, uncaring and yet somehow welcoming. "It's hard to believe my drawings matter," she said. "They matter," he replied firmly. "More than you know." A long silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was full of the unspoken, of everything they didn't need to say aloud. Nick gently squeezed her shoulder. "I know it hurts, but sometimes pain is just a sign that you're alive in all the right places." Isabel released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. They stood shoulder to shoulder as the night wind brushed past them. The hum of the city below, a distant murmur, to strangers. No longer strangers, a rooftop garden, no longer just a place between floors. Something had changed. It began as a whisper, a glance in the hallway, a pause at the water cooler. "Did you see her? She came out of the executive elevator. She's just a cleaning girl. What's she even doing on the 20th floor?" Isabel felt the shift almost instantly. The polite nods disappeared. Conversations ended the moment she entered a room. People looked past her, or worse, looked at her with judgment disguised as curiosity. She heard them one afternoon in the break room. "Clear, cold, cutting. She's not even that pretty." One woman sneered. "Just quiet. Maybe that's his type. I bet she used some sob story to get close to him." Someone else said, "You know how those types are." Isabel froze in the hallway. Her hands clutched around a folder so tightly that the edges pressed into her palms. She didn't cry. Not yet. But when the shift ended, she went to the small supply closet where she sometimes kept her art supplies hidden behind old detergent bottles. She pulled out a half-finished sketch, hands reaching upward toward a beam of light, and stared at it. The tears came quietly. That night, she went home and tapped out her resignation. No dramatic goodbye, no explanation, just one line. "Thank you for the opportunity. I will not be returning." The next morning, she dropped off her badge at the front desk. She took one last look at the towering building of Wycliffe & Co., then walked out into the rain. No one stopped her. No one even noticed. But Nick did. By mid-morning, he knew something was wrong. There was no Isabel in the elevator, no quiet figure moving silently through the hallway. By noon, he was pacing his office. He called her extension. No answer. Facilities. Nothing. Then HR. "Isabel Carter," he said tightly. "Where is she?" The woman on the other end hesitated. "She submitted her resignation this morning, effective immediately." Nick's heart dropped. "Did she say why?" "She didn't," the voice replied. "Just asked that her final paycheck be mailed." The silence that followed in his office was suffocating. Nick stared at the phone, then at the drawing still resting in its frame on his desk. The child in the rain, the mother's arms wrapped tight. She was gone, and he had let her leave without a word. That afternoon, the company gathered in the main conference hall for a quarterly update. PowerPoints, strategy slides, light applause. Nick wasn't scheduled to speak, but he walked in anyway. He entered through the side door, tall, sharp-suited, composed, until he stood in front of the microphone. The room fell silent. "I know I'm not on the agenda," he began, voice steady but edged with something raw. "But I need to address something." Every gaze turned to him. "There's been talk about a woman who worked here, Isabel Carter." He looked across the room, his eyes locked on every one of them. "Some of you have assumed she got special treatment. That because she scrubbed floors instead of running meetings. She didn't deserve attention. That maybe she traded something to get noticed." He paused. "You're wrong." From his pocket, he pulled out a folded sheet of paper, a sketch, Isabel's. "She walked into my office by accident," he continued, "and somehow she walked into my life with more honesty and grace than most people in this building." He placed the drawing gently on the podium. "She didn't ruin my morning. She saved my soul." The silence was absolute. Some gasped. Most didn't know what to say. Nick didn't wait for applause. He didn't expect it. He stepped away from the microphone, walked straight out of the room, and didn't look back. What he'd said was clear. Now, he just had to hope it wasn't too late to make it right. The gallery buzzed with quiet activity. Lights were being tested. Canvases were being carefully unboxed and framed. Names were handwritten on placards in elegant lettering. But at the center of it all stood someone no one had expected. Isabel Carter, no longer wearing a janitor's uniform, but a simple black dress. Her sleeves casually rolled up, clipboard in hand, directing the flow of preparations like someone who had always belonged in the middle of art and meaning. She had returned not to clean floors, but to lead something entirely new. It had taken to weeks. To weeks after Nick's unexpected speech, he had found her. She was living with her great-aunt 2 towns away, working part-time at a quiet bookstore. Sketching in a sunlit back room, he had shown up unannounced, holding nothing but a vision. "I'm not here to apologize," he'd said gently. "I'm here to ask." Isabel had looked up, guarded. "Ask what?" "I want to fund something. Not for me, for you, for people like you. For anyone who's ever had pain, but still found a way to create something beautiful." He laid it out. Wounds and Hope, a community-based art initiative, a gallery for children in hospitals, women from shelters, veterans, survivors, people with stories that had never been heard or seen, and he wanted Isabel to curate it. She had stared at him, her sketchpad trembling in her hands. "Why me?" Nick didn't hesitate. "Because you see people, because you still create even when it hurts, and because I trust you." She had said yes, not for him, but for the people who had never been seen. Weeks turned into months. Isabel worked tirelessly, interviewing artists, selecting pieces, organizing painting workshops, curating every detail. She painted too, not for the crowd, but for herself, for release, for connection. And Nick, he didn't disappear into boardrooms. He showed up every week, sometimes in jeans and paint-streaked sleeves, sometimes sitting cross-legged on the floor, letting children paint flowers on his shoes. He never tried to take over. He simply asked the kids what they dreamed about and listened when they answered. The bond between him and Isabel was never publicly defined, but it didn't need to be. Everyone could see it. The way he looked at her during open courtyard sessions, the way she handed him a clean brush without asking, the quiet glances exchanged over a drying canvas, something unspoken, unshakable. The night of the official exhibit launch arrived. The press came, community leaders, influencers, wealthy donors, curious families. But Isabel wasn't looking at the headlines. She was watching the walls, the stories now held in colors and ink. A crayon drawing by a child titled "My Mom's Smile After Chemo." A charcoal sketch of a broken swing set by a teenager who'd once lived on the streets. And at the center of it all, Isabel's own painting, rain cascading from the heavens. A child clutching his mother under a battered umbrella, her arms wrapped around him like a shield, a faint, unmistakable birthmark on her cheek. People stood before it in silence, some with hands over their mouths, others with tears running freely. Nick stood among them. He looked strong. Until he wasn't. When he saw the painting, his shoulders slumped, his hand covered his face, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry, not in privacy, but in the presence of others. He didn't care who saw. From across the room, Isabel watched him. She didn't move. Toward him, she didn't have to. He had allowed the world to see him, not as a CEO, but as a son. And that, to her, meant everything. That night, after the lights dimmed and the last guest filtered out, Isabel lingered in the quiet gallery. She moved slowly, straightening a placard here, brushing her fingertips along a wooden frame there. Nick found her standing alone beneath her painting, the rain, the embrace, the memory that belonged to both of them. "You did it," he said. Softly from behind her, she turned, tired but luminous. "We did." He stepped closer, the hush between them rich with something that didn't need explanation. "That painting," he began, his voice near a whisper. "It wasn't just beautiful. It was my memory." She nodded. "I know." He looked at her, as if seeing not just her, but every version of her she'd ever tried to hide. "And somehow," she added, "it was mine too." There was a long pause. Then Nick reached inside the inner pocket of his coat and slowly pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. "I wanted you to have this," he said, holding it out with both hands. "Not because it's expensive, but because it's true." Isabel's eyes widened slightly as she opened the box. Inside was a simple silver bracelet, delicate, elegant, a flowing wave pattern engraved along its edge. And at the center, a single engraved letter, B. Her fingers trembled as she touched it. The metal felt cool, but alive, like it had been waiting for her. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Nick gently took her wrist and fastened the bracelet into place, his touch careful, reverent. "I wanted you to have something as quiet but steady as your spirit," he said. "Something that says, you were seen." She blinked fast, tears gathering. The bracelet shimmered softly under the gallery lights, reflecting like moonlight on water. I don't know what to say, she murmured. You don't have to, Nick replied. This is how I've seen you from the very beginning. Not a mistake, not a charity case, not someone who wandered into the wrong room, but someone who showed me what really matters. He didn't try to kiss her, didn't reach for more. He simply stood there, letting her feel the weight of being recognized, without conditions. Tears fell freely now, not out of sadness, but out of relief. Isabel looked at him with eyes wide open, her heart raw and full, and in that stillness, with silver glinting against her wrist, she understood. This wasn't a proposal. It was a promise to be seen. To be honored. To never be invisible again. A year had passed. Where once there had been silence, now there was color. Where shadows once lingered, now there was light. In the heart of Boston, Dream Traces opened its doors, a center for healing through art, a place where laughter, paint-streaked hands, and whispered stories all found a home. At the entrance stood Isabel Carter, no longer the shy, cleaner. The silver bracelet gleamed softly on her wrist as she greeted a small line of children and teens, budding artists, dreamers, and survivors. She was no longer invisible. She was the founder, the curator, the soul of the space, and it had all begun with a mistake. Nick Wycliffe had funded it, not for attention, not for headlines, but for her, for what she had shown him, for what she had taught him. Every week, he came, not as a CEO, but as someone who had shed his armor. He painted beside the children. He listened to their stories. He let them decorate his dress shoes with daisies and stars. When one little girl asked, "Do grown-ups have dreams too?" he only smiled and pointed to Isabel. The bond between Nick and Isabel remained understated, never loud or performative. But when he glanced at her across the courtyard, or helped clean a spill without being asked, it was clear. He saw every version of her. And she, finally, saw herself. The opening night of the first major exhibition arrived. Families, reporters, donors, critics, they filled the softly lit halls, moving slowly, reverently, from canvas to canvas. The exhibition's name, well, we dream but cannot speak. There were crayon drawings and jagged charcoal sketches, watercolors that bled with emotion, pieces that didn't just display talent, they carried weight. But at the center, the painting no one could walk past without stopping, was Isabel's. A child holding his mother in the rain, their faces pressed close, the umbrella shielding them. Behind them, a silver-framed mirror, but it didn't reflect the storm. It reflected a sky within them, a quiet, impossible hope. Some viewers wept openly. Some simply stood still. Some held hands, and Nick, standing at the back of the crowd, looked at the painting with the same awe he had felt that first day in his office, when he found a sketch he wasn't ready for, but deeply needed. Isabel knelt beside a group of children near the gallery's edge, pointing to brush strokes, and telling them how the painting had come from a dream she didn't understand, until someone helped her find the meaning in it. And then, without ceremony, Nick stepped forward, bent slightly, and kissed her gently on the forehead. The moment wasn't captured by professional cameras, but someone in the crowd caught it. The photo spread across social media, not as gossip, but as something sacred. A symbol of quiet healing, of trust, of love that didn't demand the spotlight, but stood beside you, steadily, through every storm. Days later, long after the exhibition had closed and the final thank you letters had been sent, Isabel stood quietly on a windswept beach along the New England coast. The tide rolled in with a calm rhythm, the sky above tamed with the pale rose and amber glow of an early dusk. The salt in the air clung gently to her skin, brushing through her hair like a familiar voice. This place wasn't grand, but it felt like something sacred. Behind her, Nick walked slowly across the sand. His long coat danced slightly in the breeze as he reached her side. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking out at the open water beside her. "It feels different here," Isabel said softly, breaking the silence. No questions, no lights, just space. Double quotes. Nick nodded. "I used to come here when I was younger. When things felt too heavy, I'd stand right here and talk to the water." He gave a slight, dry smile. It never talked back, but it always helped. Isabel turned slightly to look at him, her expression unreadable, thoughtful. "You still do that?" she asked. "Not until you," he replied, his voice barely above the waves. They walked slowly, bare footprints trailing behind them in the wet sand. After a moment, Nick pointed toward a worn driftwood log near the shore. "Sit with me." They sat side by side, knees drawn close, silence resting comfortably between them. Nick reached into the collar of his coat, his movements slower now, more intentional. From inside, he pulled out a small velvet box, the kind that usually meant too much or nothing at all. "I wanted you to have this," he said, turning it gently in his hand, "not because of what it's worth, but because of what it means." He opened it. Inside was a silver bracelet, slender, understated, timeless. A wave pattern curved delicately along its edge, and etched into the inside, the letter BISABELLES. Breath hitched. She ran a finger across the engraving, tracing the tiny crest of each wave like she was learning a language written in metal. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Nick gently lifted her wrist and slipped the bracelet into place. "It reminded me of you. Quiet, steady, stronger than it looks." She didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat was tight, her chest full. "I don't always have the right words," he said, "but if you'll let me, I'd like to keep writing this story with you." Isabel looked up at him, the wind brushing strands of her hair across her cheek. She smiled, not wide, not dramatic, but full, a smile that came from a place far deeper than her lips. She nodded. That small gesture, simple and soft, carried the weight of everything. Hope. Trust. A beginning. Nick leaned back slightly, eyes half closed, listening to the waves crash quietly against the shore. Isabel opened her palm and let the bracelet shine in the dying light. In its silver curve, she saw herself, not as the quiet girl no one noticed, but as someone who had been truly seen. No grand speeches, no sudden declarations, just presence, and a promise etched in metal. A full year had passed. What began as an accident, a shy girl walking into the wrong office, had transformed into something lasting, something real. In the heart of downtown Boston, nestled between polished office buildings and historic brick storefronts, Dream Traces stood as a beacon, not of wealth, but of healing. Inside, sunlight streamed through tall windows. The walls were covered in vivid colors, raw sketches, and quiet masterpieces. Children's laughter echoed softly between classrooms. Hope hung in the air like the scent of fresh paint. At the front door stood Isabel Carter, silver bracelet, glinting as she welcomed each child with a warmth that came not from instruction, but from understanding. She wasn't a custodian anymore. She wasn't even just a curator. She was the heart of the center, and she had built it, with memory, with pain, with everything she once tried to hide. Each week, Nick Wycliffe arrived, not as the billionaire CEO, but as a man who had found a second chance, his sleeves rolled up, paint on his hands, sitting cross-legged beside kids who told their stories in color. And every time he looked at Isabel from across the room, it was clear she wasn't just someone who inspired the project. She was the reason it existed. The bond between them never needed a title. It lived in the little things, in how he helped a child steady their BRUSHSTROKE. In how she noticed when someone was too quiet, in how they looked at each other, full of recognition, not performance. The special exhibition was titled, "What We Dream But Cannot Speak." Critics arrived. So did reporters, families, teachers, even museum directors. But it was the art that silenced them. Portraits of grief, sketches of resilience, watercolors of joy found in broken places. And at the very center of it all, Isabel's newest piece, a rainstorm, a child in his mother's arms, a silver-framed mirror. But this time, it reflected not the sky, but them, a woman and a boy, both holding each other, both seen. People gathered in front of it and didn't move. Some cried, some closed their eyes. Some simply whispered, "That's me." Across the room, Isabel knelt beside a group of young artists, showing them how every brushstroke had meaning, even the ones you didn't understand at first. She smiled as she spoke, her voice steady. "Sometimes we dream what someone else needs to see." Behind her, Nick stepped forward. He didn't speak. He just leaned in and kissed her softly on the forehead. No cameras were needed. No headline could capture that moment. But someone in the crowd did take a photo. It traveled fast. Not as scandal, not as gossip. But as a symbol, a reminder that love, the real kind, is quiet, strong, and earned through trust. A few days later, Isabel sat across from a journalist in a bright room with high windows. The interview was nearly over when she was asked one last question. If you could say one thing to the world, what would it be? She paused, looked down at her bracelet, then back up. I'm not an artist because of what I draw, she said gently. I'm an artist because someone looked at my dreams and saw something worth loving. The interviewer didn't reply. She didn't need to. That quote became the headline, and that sentiment spread far beyond the gallery's walls into classrooms, shelters, studios, and quiet homes filled with unspoken stories, because this story was never just about art. It was about being seen, being believed, being loved, not in spite of your cracks, but because of them. That night, after the last child had gone home, Isabel stood in front of her painting. Her reflection shimmered in the silver mirror within the canvas. She didn't look away. Nick stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting lightly on her shoulder. This place feels like home, he whispered. She nodded. Because it is. They stood there together in the soft glow of drying paint and distant music. It had all started with a mistake, but it ended with a home, not made of bricks or beams, but of hearts finally allowed to shine.